I'm Carolyn Rivers, founder of Sophia Institute, and we are really, really happy to have you on our call tonight. And welcome, dear Gail. We're so happy to have you join us here at Sophia Institute for this big conversation we're going to have tonight around taking back our feminine wisdom.
A great pleasure to be here, Carolyn.
Thank you. So you're here from all over the country and even internationally. And we hope if you're calling us from the Heatherlands where it's freezing and snowing and blustery, that you join us. And just imagine Charleston right now, which very pleasantly is in the very first and early days of spring. So we'll send that warmth out to you and all we do together tonight. We're really happy to have you on this call. Gail and I met last fall in New York when she was leading a session for women on empowerment. And I felt when I met her that I'd met a resonant other almost immediately. You know that feeling. I love the way she led the session, listening with her heart. And I knew I wanted to invite her here to Sophia Institute. It was an easy recognition, and we both felt it and knew it and wanted to act on it. So this is our first opportunity to work together as we carry this conversation with you on taking back our feminine wisdom. It is a conversation, a topic, which we are both so devoted to. We live our lives from. That's a primary focus of our work. So it will be really wonderful to have this conversation together and with you, all of you on this call tonight. So, Gail, let me tell you a little bit about her in case you don't know her work well. Many of you may know it wonderfully well. What I admire so is that she's a pioneer in the field of empowerment. Gail co-directs the Empowerment Institute, a school for transformative social change where her primary focus is on women's empowerment. For the last 3 decades, she's offered her work to tens of thousands of people worldwide. She co-founded Imagine, a global initiative for the empowerment of women to help women heal from violence, build strong lives, and contribute to their community. This initiative applies the Institute's empowerment methodology to the United Nations Millennium Development Goals to promote gender equality and empower women. Imagine initiatives are underway in Afghanistan, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Sudan, in South America, in India, in Brazil, and Jordan. That's really amazing, Gail. I so admire all the work you've been doing and now been doing for decades. Gail is the author of 4 books, including the award-winning feminist memoir, which we'll be really addressing tonight. It's the heart of what we're talking about. Returning to My Mother's House, Taking Back the Wisdom of the Feminine. Also, the critically acclaimed The Rhythm of Compassion, Caring for Self, Connecting with Society. And the best-selling book, Empowerment, The Art of Creating Your Life as You Want It, which she co-authored with her husband, David. She's also a contributor to the anthology Enlightened Power, How Women Are Transforming the Practice of Leadership. So you see how much Gail has accomplished and how devoted she's been to this topic we are addressing this evening. So let's get started. At Sophia Institute, we really believe that this is a profound moment in human history when more and more women are waking up to their innate wisdom, to what calls them on the heart level, to bring forth their own gifts and talents and to use them to be co-creative agents for change, to make a difference in the world when making a difference is so essential now, to do their own deep work in the process. You could say that we are much more in touch now with the feminine at the core of life, at the sacred center of life, the feminine that sources our lives and the planet itself. More and more of us are coming to understand that bringing forth the feminine is needed now, that women's wisdom is essential. It's a time when the reconciliation with the feminine in ourselves, in our relationships, in our social structures is necessary to bring about the transformation the world needs. We're recognizing that the mindset that created the challenges we're facing is not the mindset that will solve them, as Einstein told us. A new one is needed, one that is wisdom-based and found in the hearts of women and men alike. So in our seminar tonight, we'll delve into the mysteries of our womanhood, as Gail puts it, what we have lost, how we can take back and sustain our wisdom, and how to pass on our knowledge, protecting the lineage of the feminine for our daughters and for future generations. So we know what we learn best, what we grow into, often comes out of the challenges we face and what we learn from them. And Gail, you write about that so brilliantly in Returning to My Mother's House, Taking Back the Wisdom of the Feminine. Will you share with us a bit about your own story of loss and return and what you came to understand about taking back the wisdom of the feminine? Let's talk about that.
Thank you, Carolyn, first for such a generous, warm-hearted introduction. I'm so glad to be having this conversation tonight. And hello, everyone on the phone. I'm looking forward later in the seminar to hearing your questions and your thoughts and being together in community tonight. And I have to say I'm just thrilled about coming down to the Sophia Institute. As Carolyn knows, I'm a big lover of Charleston, South Carolina, even though I'm speaking to you from the Hudson Valley in New York. So really looking forward to our adventure ahead. And the way this journey started, the journey of returning to my mother's house, which was written as a memoir and then turned very naturally into a teaching as well. And what happened is that my mother died. She had just turned 55. I was barely 23. And as I learned in writing the book, I was what is now called a motherless daughter. But I went through a long period of denial. It's very common if you've lost your mother when you're quite young. And then as I was approaching 55, the age that she died at, this won't surprise any of you on the call, I began to think of her a lot. She started coming to me in dreams. I began to fear my own death. And this, as a writer, I knew that one of the ways I could most deeply address this was to begin to write about it. It wasn't in my mind so much to formally write a memoir or even a book that I would publish, but I'm a lifelong journal keeper, as I'm sure many of you on the call are. So I began writing about this, and to make a long story short, I soon realized that this writing was the way I was grieving my mother. And even though she had died, over 30 years ago, she came very close to me in the writing, and I felt, though she had been a long time gone, I felt like I was getting to know her, which was a remarkable experience all these years later. And I began to delve into her journey and realized how she had abandoned her feminine wisdom. And then I realized how I was following in those footsteps, how I was abandoning my wisdom. And then as I went further into the writing, by that point, Carolyn, it was clear I was writing a book. I began to realize that my mother's loss of her wisdom and my loss of my wisdom was of course a universal journey, and so many women all over the world, whether they live here in North America or in Africa or Asia or India, this essential intuitive, instinctual, embodied wisdom. So many of us, it's either stolen from us or we give it away. And I then decided that this story was, the doorway to the story was my mother's death, and then her loss of her wisdom, my loss of my wisdom. But really, this book and this story was for all of us, and that's how I got started, Carolyn.
Well, when I read it myself, it was such an experience for me. I felt the universality of it. I really felt your story with your mother was the vehicle for the much larger story. I mean,
Yes.
Her own personal story is itself such a large story, but that it is an even, as you say, universal and larger story for all of us. And so my experience in reading it was, she's just navigated this so heroically, and out of it, she's come to a great clarity. And I was so happy to have so much of the book really devoted to what you've gleaned from your own life experience in both the direction of, the ways that we lose our innate female wisdom. I mean, who really talks about that? It's such an important issue for us to address. We don't intentionally mean to lose our feminine wisdom. But it happens. It happens because of the enculturation of society. It happens because of what we've learned generationally. It happens.
Yes.
And yet, in this moment in human history, more and more and more of us are saying we want to change that pattern. And we don't want to lose our feminine wisdom. But before we get to we don't want to lose our feminine wisdom, we have to understand what it is that the common ways we can lose it, so we can be on guard, so we can make different choices. So, I love the way you write about that in your book. You write about the way we close our hearts, the way we lose connection with our bodies and even the body of the earth, our addiction to doing, the way we abandon our inner lives and don't always take a stand for our authentic selves. So I know how much you have to say about this because I read your book, in almost one sitting. I enjoyed it so much. So, Gail, we'd love to hear you elaborate on all of these for us, please.
Well, it's so important what you first said, Carolyn, because I think none of us, certainly not me and not my mother, and probably none of us on the call tonight, it's not something we ever want to do, but there's so many things conspiring in the dominant culture to steal away our wisdom that I think it's so eloquent what you said, Carolyn. If we can state these things out loud, if we can articulate them, and if we know that we have a lot of company, that gives us strength. I'll mention each of them, and as you've alluded to, Carolyn, we're not going to leave you hanging, everyone. We're also going to talk about how we can take back the wisdom. So just so the women on the call sort of know the flow of the journey, this is also the workshop that we'll be doing at the Sophia Institute. I talk about an imprint from our mother, then the way we lose our wisdom, the way we can take it back, and finally, as Carolyn has alluded to, the critical aspect of passing it on and protecting it. But the way we lose it, everyone knows these things. These are things, I should say, perhaps unfortunately we're all aware of. And I think this first one about closing our heart and running from our emotions, what I've seen, Carolyn, because I've now done the workshop a lot throughout the country with many different kinds of women, different generations, different walks of life, often it's something very difficult, a seminal event that compels us to run from our feelings. It can be something extraordinarily painful, a rape, a severe illness, a divorce, a death of any kind, or a loss. And I think this is also true for men, but since we're speaking tonight mostly to women, I'm assuming, it's so human when the most difficult, the most painful thing happens, we want to run. I was a perfect example. And my denial of the pain caused by my mother's death when I was only 23, I ran from that for a long time, even though I'm, a person on a spiritual path, a person who aspires to be awake and so forth. It's just human that when something is very, very painful, our first reaction is to run from it, and that, of course, then shuts the door to our emotions, and it's our emotions we'll talk about when we talk about the ways to take back our wisdom. It's the emotions that give us this incredible connection to our wisdom and the mystery of our womanhood. So if we close, and again our society, the dominant culture, conspires to have us close to our emotions. So that's one of the first places almost all of us start to lose the strong connection with this powerful innate wisdom. The second way, all of these are connected. I'm sure everyone on the phone tonight will hear how interconnected these things are. Once we lose our connection with our bodies, and I include the body of the earth in this, that also begins to wear away a strong connection with our innate wisdom. And because we live, I think, more and more in a society, the information age, and where things are faster and all the technological overload conspires to keep us in our linear, logical mind and doesn't encourage us to stay in our bodies. So I think more and more as a society, we're becoming disembodied. We spend time inside, in our offices, in our cars, etc. So this loss of embodiment, this disconnection from our natural sensuality, our instincts, and I would include in this the power of the natural world. That's a second way we begin to lose this connection. A third way, which I write a lot about in my book and talk a lot about in the seminars, what I call this addiction to doing. And again, our society, our dominant society, encourages us to find meaning through doing. And certainly I'm not against doing, but it's very easy. Before we know it, we've become addicted to our list and our accomplishments, and the bar gets higher and higher, and we have to do more and more, and soon it's no longer about meaning and fulfillment, but we've very I should say, in my case, in my own life, before I knew it, I had crossed over the line of passionate engagement into workaholism. And I think that workaholism, this addiction to doing, is one of the most subversive enemies of the feminine and the inner life. And that's the fourth one. I say that the fourth way we lose our wisdom is that we abandon our interior. So if we say that the archetypal masculine, in its best sense, is about the exterior life, our public life, then the archetypal feminine, whether it were a man or a woman, is the critical opposite, which is the development of our interior life, our need for silence, for solitude, for prayer, for meditation, for spiritual inquiry. And again, of course, as everyone on the call knows, it's very hard in our fast-paced, complex society to protect that interior life. But before we know it, it's been stolen away by everything being in the exterior. And then the final thing that I speak about, which we all have our own stories of this, but we lose this deep, instinctual, interior female wisdom when we don't stand up for ourselves. And I talk about in the book how I watched my mother, who was a gifted painter and artist, slowly but surely, my father, the linear masculine, dominated her, and she no longer stood up for her emotional intelligence, for her instincts. And, of course, I have my own examples, and most of us can find examples of this in our workplace, in our intimate relationships, any time, whether it be in our home life or our work life, our professional life, we don't stand up for our deepest instincts and intuition. That's another way that we're losing our wisdom. So these are very, very big things in need of much more in-depth exploration, but that's just a little touching down on each of them, Carolyn.
Well, Gail, that's so helpful to have you touch down, as you say, on each one of these, because there's something about just looking at them, naming them, that gives us an opportunity to say, aha, this one I really know is an area around which I need to work, or this one I've made some progress in, or
yes,
this one,
yes.
You have that opportunity to hold that space within your own awareness of, where you are now in your own personal journey. And so I think the way you've mapped each of these, closing our hearts, and we never want to do that, but when we become aware, we can learn to teach ourselves to be aware when the heart is closed and the mind is engaging on its own without connecting to the heart. I mean, when we know that, when we know and learn to trust our intuition, it's very exciting. And one of the things we love doing at Sophia Institute is really to help women and men around the areas that you've articulated here. So that we can all have the opportunity to have a step out of ordinary time into extraordinary time to self-examine and explore and divulge where we are.
And not to blame ourselves too, Carolyn, because I think, again, I'm sure all of us have been in that place where we can really get down on ourselves. And I think the power of a seminar is that we'll be doing this in community and sharing how, though each of our stories is, of course, utterly unique, there are also just these profound universal similarities.
Yes, and I think it's such a beautiful way that women can relate through story to these universal truths. So we, of course, don't want to criticize or judge, but we do want to bring awareness, and it is that bringing the awareness that is so allows us to awaken to the next level of our beingness, and that's exciting. It's really hard
it's
work.
very exciting. Yes, it's very
exciting. It really is. So just to say, I love the way you've mapped this out, but then let's turn to what you've also mapped out around how we take back our feminine wisdom. So facing our deepest fears. I remember as a young woman many years ago coming to the understanding that if fear is centered in ego, not in who we truly are, and that when fear shows up, it's an opportunity to really take a look at, where we're anchored in our true self, whether we are anchored there or anchored elsewhere. And so I love what you have to say about facing our deepest fears and navigating them and making choices around them. And then what you say, too, about creating the trinity of home and roots and community. I love thinking of those as a trinity, Gail. It's really brilliant. And cultivating the sacred quartet of silence and simplicity and solitude and slowness. I'm just quoting you in all of this because it's so beautifully expressed, so clearly expressed, too. Engaging in the creative arts and embracing the other. So may we hear from you about all of these?
Yes. Love to. Again, everyone, I'm just going to touch down on these, knowing that they're vast realms unto themselves, of course, and then so keen to hear people's thoughts and questions. The reason I like Face Your Fear is that the linear, the rational is neat and kind of calm, but facing our fear is messy, and we can't control this. And I think that so much of the power of our wisdom, our female wisdom, is, as you said it, Carolyn, going towards this messiness, the messiness of our emotions, the actual fact that they're irrational. I talk about in the book, I remember this sort of archetypal moment at a dinner table where my father said to my mother, "You're so irrational." And of course that was exactly the point. Her wisdom was messy and irrational and instinctive and deep. There wasn't anything. My father's was rational, and everything was neat. And I think, of course, we need both. We need the rational and irrational, but the irrational doesn't have as much space in our society. So when we face our fears and our emotions, I think our passion awakens, our deeper instinctual wisdom awakens. Of course, we all know this isn't easy to do, and often it's not something we do alone. We have a mentor or a spiritual guide or a therapist to take that journey with us. But I think it's, for many of us, a critical part of taking back the wisdom. And this trinity you love so much, Carolyn, this was a very big thing for me. I think you said it well. We recognize certain ones that we're strong in, and then other places where we needed a lot of help. Well, I needed a lot of help in this. I was am still a global activist, and my work takes place all around the world. But I realized at a certain point that, well, actually I was burned out. I had terrible burnout and compassion fatigue. Again, I imagine some of the people on the call tonight can relate to this. And what I needed was roots. I had a house, but I didn't have a home. I have actually a rather magical house, but I hadn't made it into a home. I hadn't. These are ancient rituals that actually our grandmother's generation was much better at, and some of us as strong feminists, I think, kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to this one. So I needed to really cultivate my home, the roots of my place. I got to know all the geography and the plants and the creatures. And then a very big thing for me in taking back my wisdom was to really create a community of like-minded, both men and women. And so this home, roots, and community provided a real place where this instinctual female wisdom could be reborn. I could return to it, and it's closely related to this third one, and I call this the sacred quartet of silence, simplicity, solitude, and slowness. And the reason I like these 4 S's, Carolyn, is I think they are the groundwork for creating an interior life. And for me, one of the fundamental, critical aspects in taking back our feminine wisdom is creating a rich interior life. There's so many practices. Everyone on the call tonight has their own practice. Could be prayer or meditation or classical music or the natural world. But again, because modern life is so loud and so fast and so overstimulated, these 4, silence, simplicity, and solitude, and slowness, seem almost like endangered species that we have to protect in order to protect the feminine. And closely related to that, of course, is the 4th practice is time to honor our bodies, our senses, time in the natural world. We know that an integral part of female wisdom is embodiment, the deep wisdom of the body. And so whatever practice any of us chooses that allows us to live, to take time in the natural world, I think that's a very strong and almost immediate way to start to return to your mother's house, as I call it. And the 5th one is one of my favorites. I call it engaging in the creative arts, and it's basically any art form that immerses us in our right brain. It could be drawing or singing or sculpting or playing an instrument, but the seed of female wisdom, this irrational, instinctive, intuitive wisdom, is in the right brain. And we all know from vast studies now that an immersion in any creative art, I'm not talking about being a professional, I'm just talking about the joy of being involved in the creative arts. That's another very strong practice. And one that seems, the 6th one, it seems so obvious. Why do we even have to mention this? But it's interesting when I've been teaching my seminars, actually how few women have this. And I simply say that one of the 7 practices in taking back our wisdom, and I would say in this case sustaining our wisdom, is having a women's support group. Whether that's formal or just your family and your sisters and your aunts and your grandmothers. I talk about in my book this women's group I've now been part of for 35 years, and how I couldn't have returned to my own instinctual wisdom without the support of those dear, dear sisters. And the last one, Carolyn, is really, I call it embracing the other. And I feel that this practice, again, a massive domain unto itself, is really about, at its essence, the feminine is inclusive. It is non-hierarchical. It celebrates paradox. These are, of course, big spiritual practices, but in a lot of my work with women, we talk about that the feminine can hold suffering and joy and birth and death and light and dark, and that capacity to hold the paradox is another one of the practices that helps us to return to our deep wisdom. So again, I feel a little silly talking about such big things in such a short way, but at least we've landed down on each of them.
Well, we have landed down on them, and you've created, as I said when we talked about the others, you map them in such a way that it's helpful to sort of see them mapped out, because you have a chance then to, again, bring self-awareness to where we are with each of these. I remember when my dreams of the night began to indicate to me that I needed to spend more time in the natural world. And I was so first startled by the dreams, and then second when I began to understand them and to heed them, and add that as another practice for myself, these long hikes, sometimes by myself, sometimes with my husband, sometimes with friends, at the dawn time and the dusk time. I mean, so much more came from that. And not to say that I was the kind of person who lingered in my home all the time, because I really wasn't. But the conscious choice to have the time out in the natural world at the time that is a communal time, at the time to have a meditative walk or to drink in the beauty around me. And sometimes I think of you after reading your book and your beautiful area around the Hudson Valley, which I also love, and how nourishing it must be for you to strike out from your home and take a hike in the mountains and be in that self-reflective, nourishing space, just to speak of one of these that we've named.
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel the living, breathing earth, and I do think that I'm in the arms of Mother who holds me when I take those kind of walks now. I mean, my own, or when I find a spot to be, simply to be contemplative, to.
That's it, Carolyn. It's the, so many of these are the balance, or in some cases the antidote to overstimulation. It's not, of course, you and I both are very, very engaged in the world, but without the interior practices, the feminine practices, I feel the important work in the world and women's work in the world is so important in these days. We risk falling in to some of the mistakes that our men have made because they haven't nourished their interior lives.
Yes, we have to call each other on it. We have to call ourselves on it, because it is really important that we walk the talk of this. And I know you feel that as strongly as I do, and it's always a teacher, always a teacher. So I know our intention now is to open our lines, though, because I'm sure after all of this conversation for the last 40 minutes, we've got some great questions out there with you all. And so Gail and I want to pause now and give you an opportunity to raise your own questions, which we'll do our best to answer. So here's the way you can do that. If you have a question, press the 1 key on your phone, and we'll be able to see that on our screen. And when Tyler shows me that you've pressed the 1 key, I'll see your hand raised literally on my screen here, and we'll call your name and ask you to raise your question. And then Tyler will open the line so that we can hear your questions. Okay? So let's give you a moment, those of you who have questions. And we'd love it if you have, a good many have questions, because we've set aside some time now to answer your questions or to dialogue with you. Right? We're ready. Oh, all right. Gail, here's a question. Actually, it's coming in over email.
Great.
And it is around the wisdom of the body. Would you say a little bit more about how you really discern the wisdom of your body? What that, what the messages are you get, how you really cultivate that as a practice?
Oh, that's wonderful, wonderful question. I think that when I'll just speak the only thing I know, which is my own journey with this. When I take care of my body, not perfectly, because none of this is about perfectionism, but when I do my best to walk, as we've mentioned, the physical practice, whatever that might be, to eat well, to rest well. In other words, when I respect my body, I feel like the language, it speaks to me so clearly. Its voice is loud and clear. As I age, for example, my body's voice is telling me things that it didn't tell me in a decade before this. And so I guess I'm saying, for me, there's a corollary between good self-care and respect and my capacity to hear clearly the messages of my body and to take them seriously. I also think that our bodies are so enormously forgiving, and we all go through periods where our body practices aren't what we want them to be, either lack of exercise, lack of good food, lack of the rest we really need. We might be going through very, very stressful time for many different reasons. But I think if we even pause and give our body a good massage, or take it out and it has a good massage, or exercise, or we do something really loving and sweet, our body doesn't need a lot to love us back. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I love the way you put that, honestly. And you and I are approximately the same age, and we haven't talked about this much, but there is a change that we can monitor as we move from one decade to the next in the way our body serves us, you could say, and the way we serve our body. But I really feel one of the things I've learned to trust and to really love is that sometimes it is my body that gives me the first signal about something that I know. Maybe it's a question I'm holding, a dilemma I'm facing. And sometimes I have that knowing that comes through my body itself. You could say, not so much through my mind, but through body wisdom, through a knowing that sort of just percolates up.
Yeah.
And I've learned to trust that. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does happen. And when it does, I have wanted to honor it and to trust it so that I can say, here's another way of wisdom coming through that I really want to learn to exercise, like exercising any muscle. This wisdom of the body can become such an ally for us. You
Yeah.
know, I think, and I know we could talk about this a lot more, but perhaps we should see if there's another question. So I'm going to pause and ask Gail to pause with me, as someone else would want to do just this process again, either to email us or to hit the one key on your phone, and we'll see that on our screen.
And even Carolyn, if it's not a question, maybe some thoughts, comments. We're so open to any kind of conversation.
Your own reflections, dialogue. Doesn't have to be a question. Okay, I think Shirley Curtis has a comment, question. Shirley,
yes,
go
what
ahead.
if you've had generations of women who have just gone through incredible, horrible experiences? How do you begin to take that generational experiences and turn them around for yourself and for your daughter and granddaughter and those coming?
I think, I think we can only start with one step. It's simple steps. It's like, Shirley, the drops in the bucket. And I think a wonderful place to start is, as Carolyn has alluded to, is through stories, sitting down with our daughters, our granddaughters, telling them our stories, being forthcoming in both the places where we've lost our wisdom, the places of both empowerment and disempowerment. Story is the oldest of healing vehicles, and I still believe that's where so much of this begins. And providing strong role models for our daughters and our granddaughters, women who we feel have honored their deepest wisdom, women writers, filmmakers, teachers, mentors. I think those are some of the ways. And you bring forward the point that we can't do this alone. This has to be done in community. I think the retrieval of our deepest wisdom is a collective journey. It's a communal journey.
Well, I really agree with that. And, we were talking as we were in the green room before the call came about the initiative 1 Billion Rising that Eve Ensler began, and maybe some of you on the call participated in your own communities, that is taking a stand against violence for women and girls worldwide. And I think what you're saying about story is so important, because when women have been violated in any way, to be in a community of other women where they can safely begin to share, to be heard, to be presenced by women who listen with their hearts, as I've seen you do so beautifully, Gail. There is that sacred container that we hold here so often at Sophia Institute. And that container assisted not just by us women, but by, from the other side as well, you could say, by
yes,
she
absolutely.
who holds the sacred center.
Yeah.
Healing can happen in a profound way.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why
I think to your point, Carol, and to your question, a lot of my work now is with women in Afghanistan and in terrible situations and sex trafficking in India and some really extraordinarily difficult things. But the other side of that is the extraordinary resiliency of women. And when there's a return to dignity, when there's an opportunity to be heard, to tell your story, to feel that you can, a lot of the work we're doing now is to help women create new visions, life-affirming visions. And when that happens, the amount of resiliency that I'm witnessing in some of the women that I'm working with now is just, it's mind-boggling. And I think that's a lot of the work that Eve has been doing through V-Day would also corroborate that, though the unthinkable has happened to so many of these women. With support and skills and a community, they're able to take back not just their wisdom, but their power and their capacity to contribute to their families and their communities.
Yes, and
so
that's such a hopeful thing.
It's very hopeful. I mean, there's so much that's so scary and just discouraging when we think we're going into next week will be International Women's Day, and I'm taking part in the United Nations Commission on Women, the 57th session, and there's so many discouraging statistics, but there are also very, very many encouraging things as well.
Well, we're
think.
making them public now. We're really shining a light on them, and I think that, and we're asking for change, and women are saying no more.
That's right.
And that's, for me, I think, a very hopeful thing. Not that it doesn't alleviate the violence and the pain. I mean, it doesn't make it acceptable, of course. It doesn't at all. But at least now it's not so much undercover as it used to be. It's not,
Carolyn. It's and I'm sure many people on the call tonight are familiar with the Half the Sky book by Cheryl Wudunn and Nicholas Kristof, and now that's a whole movement. So that, as you say, these things they're out in the open, and we know we have to change them.
That's a step in the right direction. Well, we have another great question that just was emailed to us from Jackie, and here's Jackie's question. How do we break the cycle of giving up our power as women?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that breaking the cycle, again, I feel a little bit like I'm repeating myself, but it starts with an understanding clearly of where that started. Did it start with your mother? Can you trace it back to your grandmother? So a lot of the work that I do with women, we're looking at our lineage. And part of my work in writing the book was to go back and look at my own lineage. And once we understand that loss of power and wisdom probably didn't start with us, that helps. And I think that, again, if we have a community of like-minded, it could be men and women, but for many of us, it's helpful to have a community of like-minded women who are also looking at where they lost their power. And so, I feel we can't do this in isolation. This is a community event. It's also something that takes time. It's the reason I use the word practices. I think the taking back of power and wisdom, it takes time. It takes any number of practices, whether they be, as we've touched on tonight, physical practices, spiritual practices, emotional practices, or for some people, engaging in the creative arts through dancing or drawing or sculpting, the way that we've lost our power and how we can take it back. So I think there are many avenues, many practices to helping us take it back, and I think perhaps the most important thing from my view is to do that in a community of kindred spirits.
Because it is it's a process over time.
It's a process over time. Yeah.
And it is taking the first step that is probably the biggest step. It's the commitment to the process, and then to have the resources at hand that helps one through the process. I mean, it's really, honestly, a very exciting thing to see when a woman makes
very exciting. And I often say, you know, if you know, don't try and do it alone. So many of my students, and I think myself included, often at some point we feel I have to figure this out and unpack this and resolve this on my own. I actually think we can't do this on our own. We need either some dear good friends, dear family members, or if appropriate, a counselor or spiritual advisor to help us at certain junctures in our journey anyway.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we have another question. We have time for another. Either email in or by pressing 1 on your keypad. All right. Beryl has a question for us. Beryl, we'll give you the line.
Great.
Hi, Gail. My name is Beryl, and I met you years ago in psychosynthesis, in either with New York or
Beryl.
Hey, how are you? I have a question. I just came back from Costa Rica. I was on the Caribbean side, and I noticed deeply the disempowerment of women in culturally, and I saw that one of the main issues seemed to be the fact that they had very little financial resources in order to affect change. And so one of the things that I found, hopefully that was helpful, is for the brief time I was there, helping to empower the women that I came in touch with who may have been in abusive relationships or that were, you know, knew that they needed change. But because they felt as if they were disempowered because of their financial lack, quote unquote, to help them see where their strengths were and where their allies were. And I found that just working one-on-one with women, just the sharing and the helping them to, in a psychosynthesis way, to envision where the strength is within themselves, seemed to help make a shift, at least in a few women that I just interfaced with. So I guess my question is, you know, that for these women in countries that are second and third world, how do we help them from that financial point of view to empower themselves? Because with that sense of feeling more financially secure, it kind of, you know, takes them out of the vicious cycle of the abuse.
Well, you know, it's fascinating, Beryl, because my work in the Imagine initiative that Carolyn spoke of earlier is basically about this interior empowerment. And we join with already existing NGOs, for example, an NGO in Pune in India who's working with sex trafficking. And they have, in many cases, there is some economic empowerment coming towards them. But what we're finding is that, and this won't surprise you because of your background in psychosynthesis, unless that economic empowerment is joined with interior empowerment, the kinds of things we've been talking about on the call tonight, or what in the development sector is called agency. Unless a woman has agency, a sense that she can work with her own interior, her sense of dignity and self-esteem and interior strength, the capacity to hold her own destiny in her hands. Those are interior beliefs. Unless those interior beliefs, what we could call, since the context tonight is the feminine, the feminine aspect of empowerment, often what happens, and this is now being rather widely documented, all the millions of dollars that are poured into the global South, much of it is not well leveraged, because the woman gets a little bit of money, but then she goes back and her husband beats her, and she doesn't have the interior strength to leave the marriage. Or so I guess my answer would be that I think, not surprising, but it's taken a long time to understand this, that true sustainable empowerment has to be a balance of economic empowerment and interior empowerment. And clearly what you were doing with the women in Costa Rica was some beautiful and effective interior empowerment. And if that could be joined with economic empowerment, you have a kind of indomitable combination. So you were on to something very good in what you were doing, it sounds like.
Well, it was an honor.
Well, what a great dialogue. We have time for one more question or a dialogue as we just had with Beryl. So one more email or hand raised by pushing 1 on your keypad. Okay, well then maybe that's it for our questions and comments. Gail, let's move on to what you and I are going to be doing in Charleston on March the 22nd through the 24th. We are really excited to have Gail at the Sophia Institute to go much, much, much more deeply and expansively in the topics that we've been talking about tonight. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll be doing together that weekend, Gail.
Yes, wonderful. Well, I'm excited because, as I said, I love Charleston. It's one of the most charming, interesting, lovely cities in our country, I think. So I have to say that, first of all, I think the attraction for those of you on the call who aren't living in Charleston, that's a big draw. And, you know, I think the main thing is, as we've spoken tonight, it'll be a circle of women, women who want to explore deeply, a community of women, deeply who they are, where they've given away this wisdom, how they can take it back, and for many of them, how they can pass it on to their daughters, or if relevant, their granddaughters. I'm, as you know, Carolyn, a very experiential teacher, so though I will be lecturing a bit, mostly it will be small groups and artwork and guided meditations and journaling, and we'll literally go through together these 4 phases. The first phase will explore experientially what was the imprint from our mothers. Did we get a strong imprint of female wisdom or not? Some of us did, some of us didn't, and that's very interesting actually to explore together. Then we'll look, as we've touched on tonight, through discussion and all kinds of experiential work, how we lose our wisdom. And as you said, Carolyn, we'll see some of these things were strong, but other places are growing edges, are places for development. We'll look through meditation at these 7 practices. We'll look much more in depth. How do we take back the wisdom? How do we sustain the practices that allow us to stay strong, to trust ourselves, to share that wisdom in the world? And then finally, how do we pass on the wisdom as mentor to our daughters, our granddaughters, but also as mentors to the next generation? And in a certain way, that last phase, Carolyn, is looking at how together we protect this wisdom. So as one of the questions tonight ask, well, how do we not keep giving it away? So it will, I think, be a very intimate, probably lots of tears, but lots of laughter. Again, many different modalities of learning, so that it's engaging for everyone. As most people know, what often happens at the end of a weekend like this, we start off and we're like a group of strangers, but by Sunday afternoon, we feel like we've known each other our whole lives. And hopefully, if relevant, often when I've taught this seminar, the women stay in touch a long time afterwards, just through chatting and email and so forth and so on. So I think it'll be both a deep but also a joyous adventure, Carolyn.
Well, I feel confident of that. I really do, Gail. And from the moment we met, and then my pretty soon thereafter opportunity to read your book, I really knew, as I said in the beginning of this call, I wanted to invite you to be here with us, because your work is so at the heart of what Sophia Institute holds as our work here. I mean, we really do believe that we're living in a time where the feminine is being brought forth. And when I say the feminine, I mean the feminine principle in the hearts of women and men. And I mean the opportunity for women to work together to cultivate their true natures, to do their own deep work, and to take that work as an ongoing project for themselves, meaning as an ongoing commitment to cultivate their own wisdom, and to take that wisdom back to our relationships, to our workplace, to our communities, and in that way into the world at large, because it is that women's voices and women's talents and women's energies, women's capacities are really needed now in the domain of human affairs, as Jean Houston puts it, because we're at that challenge moment in human history, and women being most fully who they are, most truly empowered naturally and in all aspects of their beingness, is really can bring forth a wisdom, that has not been present in the decision making in the way it could be now. So in that way, it's exciting. And every time we gather, as we'll do with you on March the 22nd through the 24th, we have the opportunity to make a difference in our own lives and in the lives around us. And I'm really fully committed to that. And I know we're going to have a profound, joyous, empowering time together. So I'm very excited about it. And just to add what you said about Charleston, I grew up in this area, and when I left my career to found the Sophia Institute, I really didn't know how it would go. This is a traditional community and historically and culturally very rich, but this is not a place where the kind of work we're doing at Sophia Institute is commonly held. And yet it is anchored here so beautifully now. And after a decade of work around this, we have an extraordinary community of people here locally and from all 50 states and 8 other countries. So, we're in this punctuated equilibrium now, this time where when we hold hands and do this work together, we have the opportunity to make such a difference, and I feel very committed to that. So we'll be in Charleston springtime. If you're in Minnesota or Toronto, which I know some of you are calling us from there, this is truly spring, and flowers bloom and the sun shines, and you can maybe even come with only a light sweater. So consider that as well. We'd love to have you with us. And Gail and I just wanted to begin as we prepare for that weekend to have this wonderful call with you tonight. So we're so happy to have so many of you on the call and bringing forth your thoughts and your questions. So Gail, as we're closing, I wonder if you might have some piece, something from returning to My Mother's House, taking back the wisdom of the feminine, you might want to share with us a little reading you might give us.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to, and thank you, Carolyn. I'm so looking forward to my time with you and at the Sophia Institute, and I know some of the women I know who are coming. I'm just so excited, and hope that some of the women with us tonight will be joining us as well. I'm just going to read a little bit. It'll take me a few minutes, just from the prologue, because I think it touches down on so many of the aspects that we spoke of tonight, and I think gives a bit of a feeling and a flavor of what our time together will be. So I'm just starting in kind of in the middle of the prologue, but hopefully this will make sense for everyone. This loss of my mother's authentic self has shaped my life, propelling me around the globe to reclaim what she left behind, to retrace the series of small deaths she suffered each time she abandoned more of her instinctual wisdom. I, too, betrayed my feminine, paying blind allegiance to the flag of the masculine with its bold stripes of workaholism, speed, and overdrive. Luckier than my mother, I realized that my feminine was dying before it was too late, before there was no turning back, before the spiritual dying entered my body and made me sick. With the consciousness and resources of my generation, I came to understand why I had sacrificed my interior life, the rich realm of feelings and moods, intuition and creativity, stillness and contemplation, to the overwhelming seduction of our dominant cultural values. I came to see why I had fallen under the spell of a culture that pays tribute to rational thought and exterior accomplishment, and at all costs, on all levels, encourages and rewards the principles of bigger, more, and faster. This is the story of how I returned to my mother's house and reclaimed my own feminine wisdom, taking back what both Mom and I had betrayed. I see now how my story is so many of our stories. It is the story of both men and women who have abandoned their inner lives, leaving behind their hearts where deep, dark feelings reside, putting aside their intuitive imagination where dreams flourish, ignoring the invisible worlds where the irrational and the mysterious offer their incomparable gifts, and disowning the realms of silence, simplicity, and solitude where the interior matures. Modern life rarely acknowledges or even allows space for such things, but we ignore these things at our peril, both as individual human beings and as an earth family. Come, dear reader, Return to the house of the Great Mother. Enter the soft, rounded door and feel immediately welcome in the central room of the heart, fully open and exposing an enormous breadth of emotional intelligence. Sit down and rest in any of the ample, cozy corners dedicated to the interior values of stillness and contemplation. Up, up. Take the elegant, grand staircase of relationships made up of collaboration, cooperation, communication, and caring. Only by taking these steps can you reach the upper levels of the Great Mother's house, where the rooms of intuition provide safe haven for the imagination, for dreams and symbols, for creativity and the arts. And don't forget to visit the secret dark spaces, chambers of the irrational, of death, of the wild and untamed. Take your time. These hidden spaces have much to offer. Arriving at the top of the house, you find the numinous birth of the invisible with its direct connection to the divine. I know how you feel up here in this sacred space. This is what has been missing from your life. This is what you have been so hungry for. You ache to sit here for a long time before you have to return to all that is concrete and reasonable and fast. I invite you to stay as long as you need. With all my heart, I urge you to fully re-inhabit this house for yourself, for your children and grandchildren, and for our earth. Do this before it is too late.
Gail, that's so beautiful. Really, really so beautiful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Gail and I would really wish to invite you to join us on March the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th in Charleston, South Carolina at the Sophia Institute. And you can call us at 843-720-8528 if you have questions, or you can email us at info@thesophiainstitute.org, or you can simply go to our website. And if you'd like to just register online, you can easily do that. And the website is www.thesophiainstitute.org. It's going to be a marvelous time we have together, and we've so enjoyed having you on the call tonight. Gail, I thought it would be fun if we opened up the lines so everybody could say good night to each other.
Oh, yes, wonderful, wonderful.
All right, wonderful. Thanks. The lines are open.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Good night.
Goodbye. Thank you, Gail and Carolyn. Thank you. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Lovely.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That was fun. Oh, Gail, that was